Chapter 1756 A strong man made of corpses and bodies. Zhang Yi asked Deng Shentong for all of Deng Technology's human experimentation research materials before rushing to the command center building where Zhu Jing was located. When he appeared in front of the doors, the guards at the entrance saw him, and each of their eyes instantly lit up. Nowadays, Zhang Yi was a godlike existence inside their eyes. Looking at the 6 regions, which other region could be like Jiangnan region, which had barely experienced any major upheavals after the end times? All of this was attributed to the fact that they had the top mutants in Huashu Kingdom. Salute. The officers leading the group straightened their stance and saluted respectfully. Zhang Yi smiled at them and nodded before walking straight into the building. Blizzard City did not seem to have changed much on the surface nowadays, and there were still some familiar faces still working here. After all, those who were able to work in the command center, even if it was just an ordinary clerk, had to have a notable background in Blizzard City. For example, there was a crazy and silly female clerk over at the front desk, who was Zhu Zheng's niece, Zhu Lark. When Zhang Yi suddenly arrived, someone immediately led the way for him, and it was a special case that he didn't need any notification when he wanted to see Zhu Zheng. As for Zhu Zheng, he received the news of Zhang Yi's arrival and immediately prepared himself, asking his men to prepare the finest refreshments. At the same time, his heart was in his throat, facing this great god Zhang Yi. He was loving and afraid, and at the same time, somewhat cynical. However, with all the complicated emotions, when he really faced Zhang Yi, he was more flattering and pleasing. Zhang Yi arrived at Zhu Zheng's office, and Zhu Zheng immediately greeted him with a smiling face. "My Captain Chaos, how did you find the time to come here? Just tell me if you have any instructions. How can I be so kind as to bother you with a personal trip?" Zhang Yi sat down on the chair opposite Zhu Zheng, while Yang Xinxin and the girls stood behind him. "There are some things I need to personally come over to confirm." Zhang Yi stared at Zhu Zheng with a smirk and said, "It's about your science research department. I want to get all of their research information." Zhang Yi did not beat around the bush and came up to demand the core secrets of the Jiangnan region. Zhu Zheng froze for a moment and began to feel something bad in his heart. The Department of Science had always engaged in human experimentation, which was an undisclosed secret, and if those things they had done were put under the sunlight for other people to see, many of them would be unseemly. In these past few years, thanks to the stability of Blizzard City, it had allowed the Science Research Center's research to grow by leaps and bounds. Zhuyu, or research material with the potential of Epsilon, was also one of their strengths. Zhu Jing looked at Zhang Yi and wondered if Zhang Yi had come over to settle scores with him regarding Zhuyu. He couldn't help but smile and ask, "Tell me what information you need. I can have someone transmit it to you right away." Zhang Yi's brows lowered, his fingers tapping on the thick mahogany desktop. "Not only do I want that information, I'm also quite curious about your research center." Zhu Zheng's heart turned over. But in reality, with barely the slightest hesitation, he got up and said to Zhang Yi with a sincere expression, "Zhang Yi, as long as it's something you need, I'll do everything I can to provide it to you. Not to mention just visiting that experimental base." His heart was not reluctant, but he could not show the slightest bit of it on the surface. The rise of Zhuyu had indeed given him a certain foothold in the world. However, when Zhang Yi returned from Brahma, he realized that he did not yet possess the backbone to call Zhang Yi's bluff. Zhu Jing wasn't a fool. He knew clearly how foolish it was to display an arrogant face before having full certainty. "Well then, let's go over there now." Zhu Jing immediately led Zhang Yi to the underground area of the command center. They met Li Lingxue, the head of the command center, again, the slender woman who always liked to tie up her hair with a carbon pencil and looked like she had skin with a sickly pallor. For 365 days a year, she spent most of her time in the underground laboratory, so she looked to have turned into this appearance. As soon as Zhu Jing came over, he said to Li Lingxue, "Minister Li, immediately transfer our experiment center, all of our research materials to a copy of His Excellency Chaos." His face wore a smile and sincerity, but Li Lingshua's heart knew what Zhu Jing meant. Even if they really wanted to give Zhang Yi the information, they absolutely had to take out that part of the gloom from before. For example, how they had variously put mutants to death through despicable means and then conducted experiments. As well as the matter of juicing mutants with special abilities for Zhu Yu to absorb. These things were Zhu Zheng's black materials, and they definitely couldn't be easily leaked out. Yes, I understand. Li Lingxue held up her thick black-framed glasses and said expressionlessly. Also, you take us and tour around the entire experimental center. Zhu Jing commanded. Li Lingxue spread her hands towards the side before turning around and saying, then please follow me. The experimental center here was somewhat similar to Deng's technologies, but it was not exactly the same. Both experimental centers had their own source technologies, and at this moment, facing Zhang Yi, they didn't dare to display them with the slightest reservation. Even the instruments and equipment for those extreme means when they did human experiments were all shown to Zhang Yi's several people. If one didn't know, they would have thought that this was a torture chamber. However, when they came over, those instruments had all been cleaned, and there was not the slightest trace of blood or human organs on them. Li Lingxue said lightly, these are the early experimental props. At that time we believed that all humans have great potential. And the means to force humans to awaken their supernatural abilities was great external stimulation. So, pain, hallucinations, noise, sleeplessness, suffocation, all sorts of means we have made attempts. Well, of course, there are also methods such as implanting human cells. However, this means has basically been eliminated nowadays because the survival rate is too low, and even if a mutant is successfully created, it still needs to be injected with anti-rejection drugs for a long period of time. Zhang Yi and the others visited these laboratories and suddenly asked, I want to know, where's Zhu Yu's laboratory? Upon hearing Zhu Yu's name, Zhu Jing and Li Lingshue's eyes both wavered for a moment. The smile on Zhang Yi's face became even more intense. I remember the last time I saw Zhu Yu here, she had yet to break through to Epsilon. After all, as a clone of the original Yuan Kongyue, she only retained half of the original Yuan Kongyue's genes in her body, so at that time, you guys told me that normal means would not be able to make him break through. Zhang Yi stroked his chin and asked curiously, then, what exactly did you guys do afterwards to make her break through? This is something that I am very curious about. Chapter 1757 The Nature of Energy. The thing that Zhang Yi wanted the most was the mutant promotion technique. Through the lost stone slate, he had gradually understood the essence of mutant mutation, but on the technical level, he was still missing some important means. And Zhu Yu's appearance made him stare at Blizzard City. Zhang Yi stared at Li Lingxue. Please tell me what exactly you have done for her. Li Lingxue turned her head to look at Zhang Yi, seeing that her gaze actually crossed over Zhang Yi to Zhu Jing, who was on Zhang Yi's right side. Zhu Jing hurriedly said, there is nothing that cannot be said to His Excellency Chaos. Only then did Li Lingxue say to Zhang Yi, her genes, originally possessed potential of the Epsilon level. It only needs to be developed properly to have a chance to advance. And all we are doing is helping to mend its genetic defects. This was not easy to do, and it took us 2 years of time to accomplish it. She led Zhang Yi towards the front. Let's go, here are the answers you want. Zhang Yi glanced at Zhu Jing next to him, who gave him back a genuine smile. Zhang Yi smiled faintly and walked forward. Not long after, they arrived at a huge laboratory. It was incredibly empty and was more than 10 meters high, and the floor was covered with a square white floor of about 1 square meter, highlighting the entire laboratory with extraordinarily translucent light. At the forefront of the laboratory, there stood a huge machine, a 5-meter-tall transparent jar quietly displayed in front of Zhang Yi's eyes. In the other directions of the machine, a thick and long pipe was connected in all directions, and looking along them, one could see that at the edges of the walls on both sides, there was another transparent cylindrical glass bin of the same type that was 2 sizes smaller. Li Lingxue said to Zhang Yi, we used the most primitive method to extract the mutant's origin. Zhuyu cells are very special and are able to absorb other people's origin, including supernatural abilities, at the fastest speed. That's why at the very beginning stage, the method we used was a filler-type mass infusion. Zhang Yi looked at the transparent glass silos that were greenish in color, and he could feel an eerie aura. It was obviously bright here, but it always made people feel less comfortable. Zhang Yi was also considered to be battle-hardened, having crawled out from inside the piles of the dead. He knew what this meant. This place had, at one time, seen many people die. Humans could feel this eerie aura in a place where a large number of their kind had died. This was because when creatures died, they would unintentionally release a special pheromone, which could then be picked up when the same kind came here. This was a kind of warning of danger, telling its companions to stay away from this dangerous area. Zhang Yi already understood how this machine was used, and that was to kill a large number of mutants and feed Zhuyu. The origin of the mutants was difficult to preserve, and unless special equipment was used, it would dissipate quickly after a person's death. Therefore, experimenting directly with living people would have the best results. Li Lingshua's face was expressionless as she said in a flat tone, "Through this instrumentation and equipment, the absorption efficiency of the mutant origin can be enhanced. This is able to increase by 20% over ordinary direct absorption." Zhang Yi stuck his hands in his pockets and glanced back at her. Is this the means she used to break through to Epsilon? Li Lingshua's eyes became deeper, a morose white light refracting from her lenses, but she did not open her mouth to answer. The smile at the corner of Zhang Yi's mouth intensified. Li Lingxua hesitated for 2 seconds before replying, "The so-called quantitative change triggering qualitative change can be done before the delta level. But trying to break the bottleneck of the life level would be difficult to do. So then, we started using higher-level mutants to do research. There was a time when the missions that Blizzard City's investigation forces went out on had a very important item, capturing high-level mutants. Insubordinates such as the sprites of the Iceflower Swamp were arrested in large numbers and sent to the lab. Later on, we discovered that amongst the origin of the high-level mutants, an entirely new substance was born." Zhang Yi looked at Li Lingxua, the answer in his mind already calling out. The source substance of biological evolution, is it? The source of God, or the origin of the spirit of sacrifice, was bound to be closely related to the mutants. Li Lingxua nodded. The closer the mutant is to biological evolution, the more of this special substance it contains in its body. Our experiments are still in the early stages, and the initial extraction of some of the source matter allowed Zhuyu to advance to the life level. However, a flash of excitement appeared on her face as she looked at Zhang Yi, her eyes as if sizing up an excellent test piece. The higher the level of the mutant, the richer the evolutionary substance becomes. If it's a mutant who has reached the Epsilon realm, the evolutionary substance contained within his body, the so-called source of God as you call it, should be even more. By this time, those doubts in Zhang Yi's heart were basically solved. The origin of supernatural abilities, as well as the nature of the source of God and the spirit of sacrifice, what was not clear at this point? The death of a large number of surface organisms brought about by the cataclysm had resulted in the life energy contained within each and every organism being centralized. It was then absorbed by a small number of people, resulting in the emergence of supernatural abilities. The underground civilization, on the other hand, had mastered the technique of collecting evolutionary substances early on, thus obtaining the source of God as well as the spirit of sacrifice. It was only that the source of God was a substance that they seemed unable to use, and thus did not treasure it, and the reason for this could only wait until later to slowly study it. However, right now, Zhang Yi knew the essence of the source of God, so he could proceed to create it. It takes a large number of ordinary mutants to obtain a little bit of the source of God. However, what if I directly extract it with the origin of an Epsilon-level mutant? Right now, the percentage of extraction wasn't clear. But there was already a method. To create a new Epsilon, one had to kill an Epsilon at the very least. Aside from supernatural powers, the matter and energy of this world remained basically constant, and doing so would be tantamount to transferring life energy. Very well, I've got it. Thank you, Professor Li Lingxue. Zhang Yi smiled and said to Li Lingxue. Li Lingxue nodded faintly. Then, next, please provide me with all your research materials, including your most advanced technologies. Zhang Yi repeated again. Zhu Jing said smilingly, that's natural. Right now. Zhang Yi turned around with a smile and said to Yang Xinxin, Xinxin, don't bother people. Let's do it ourselves. Yang Xinxin was one of the world's top hackers, and she stepped in to directly operate the experiment center's system, which could ensure that no information was left out, lest Zhu Jing play tricks with them. Zhu Jing watched, and although he was a little unhappy in his heart, there was nothing else he could do. In the end, Yang Xinxin came directly to the control hub of the experiment center and retrieved all the data. And before leaving, she quietly implanted a Trojan horse. In this way, from now on all the information here would be clearly grasped by her. Chapter 1758, Purin's Calling. Zhang Yi and the others did it smoothly and did not suffer any obstacles. It was such a smooth way to do things when one had absolute say. Afterwards, they thanked Zhu Jing for his kindness in retaining them for dinner and returned to Tianhai City. Zhang Yi asked Yang Xinxin, will the implanted Trojan horse be discovered? Yang Xinxin blankly glanced at Zhang Yi and spat with some dissatisfaction, brother, trust Xinxin's skills, okay? Just with their technicians, they don't have that ability to discover the Trojan horse I implanted. Moreover, even if they found it, they can only immediately keep it. Because that Trojan horse was left behind by her, once Zhu Zheng's people did something, it would be tantamount to embarrassing Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi smiled faintly, rubbed his nose and said, looks like they'll have to recreate an experimental base. Yang Xinxin smiled with an indifferent face. But what if what I invaded was the entire Blizzard City's network system? The two looked at each other and laughed. This world was a giant straw man, and the technicians of Blizzard City were all dish-like new recruits in front of Yang Xinxin. This was because when the end times had just descended, most of the technicians who stayed within Blizzard City were basically people within the unit. Their technical level compared to Yang Xinxin is too big a gap, and 3 years of temporary construction of the network security system, in the eyes of Yang Xinxin, is even more holes. Sure enough, as soon as Yang Xinxin and the others left, Zhu Jing immediately instructed Lan Xinxing and Li Lingxue with a serious expression. Immediately begin to build the second experimental center. Our source technology absolutely cannot be easily leaked out. The original laboratory retains some of the researchers to continue working. Just occasionally take out a portion of the early experimental data and input it inside the system. The two nodded and followed Zhu Zheng's instructions. On Zhang Yi's side, after getting the data from the two Blizzard City families, he directly gave it to Lu Karen. Karen, take a look at these technologies. How long will it take for us to build a complete system to extract the source of God within the mutant's origin? Lu Karen's eyes quickly erupted with excitement when she saw the large amount of experimental data, as well as the drawings of various instruments and equipment. It was because she saw in it the hope of her promotion to Epsilon. Her ability didn't have any strengths amongst battles. Even after promotion, it wouldn't make her stronger. However, it would definitely enhance her abilities in the field of mechanical engineering. Or even, by changing the structure of atoms, to directly create new matter. To put it simply, hand-rubbing a nuclear bullet could be possible. The source of God originally needed to travel to the most dangerous underground world in order to obtain it. This kind of thing was unattainable, and she didn't dare to ask for it. But right now, the future was grasped in her own hands, so of course she was excited. Lu Karen looked at Zhang Yi and nodded solemnly. Don't worry, brother. Just leave this matter to me, I'll definitely accomplish the task properly. She had ample confidence that she could construct a more perfect laboratory than the two in Blizzard City. To her eyes, it seemed that these lab equipment were clumsy and ineffective. If she was allowed to do it, she could definitely do a better job. Zhang Yi nodded and smiled. Let it go. If you need any help, just let me know. As long as you succeed here, I don't mind going to kill a few Epsilon-level mutants. This world was in constant strife, and the wars never stopped. As for Zhang Yi, it might not be good to get a Black Chariot-level origin nowadays. After all, the number of Black Chariot-level mutants in the world was not much. But for White Chariot-level Inhumans, except for a small number of special ability users, he could basically kill them in seconds. With Zhang Yi's trust, Lu Karen returned to her studio and started to build the equipment according to the information she got from Blizzard City. Zhang Yi sat on the sofa in the living room, his arms crossed and his gaze deep. Blizzard City now had preliminary access to the technology of extracting the source of God, so it also meant that there must be other powerful forces in this world that were also researching this field. Perhaps they had already achieved greater results. In that case, Epsilon-level mutants would appear more often. However, there was one thing that Zhang Yi could confirm, and that was that the number of these powerful mutants would not be too many. Because according to the principle of conservation of energy, in order to create a new Epsilon-level Inhuman, one would have to kill an Epsilon-level Inhuman to obtain the mutant, and even more would have to be killed to produce a copy of the source of God, considering the loss of energy. Either that, or it would be extracted by killing a large number of lower-level mutants, though this would be less efficient. There is another way to do it. That is that at the beginning of the end times, the life energy of a large number of dead beings was captured by the underground civilization world. That's why so many powerful mutants were born among them. Zhang Yi propped his chin with both hands. The war will come sooner or later. The celestial execution that the underground civilization is afraid of seems to be getting weaker and weaker nowadays. Sooner or later, we will collide with them one day. I, and the people around me, must become stronger. Only then will we be able to defend ourselves. Delta-level mutants, nowadays he was able to cultivate them in bulk. The Earth Centipede's origin, including the captain-level origin of the Green Armor Warriors that he had killed in large quantities in the beginning, was now in greater supply than demand, and he simply couldn't run out of it. When the reconstruction of Tianhai City was completed, he would select the most talented group of mutants and cultivate them. Just as Zhang Yi was planning for the future, a communication video from the far north caused his peaceful life to ripple once again. That night, Zhang Yi had just finished sparring with Liang Yu in the basement. After 3 years of teaching from this martial arts master, Zhang Yi's close combat ability had been greatly improved. His base itself was good, and 3 years was enough time to learn the real killing techniques. In ancient times, it would often take only a few months for a master who ran a martial arts school to teach his close disciple the best techniques. As for those who stood on stakes, tied horses, hit wooden stakes, and studied a set of boxing skills for more than 10 years, they were all just a fool ordinary disciples to pay tuition fees, as well as to be a free fighter's routine. That's why today's Zhang Yi was already a powerful martial artist as well. This was also the reason why, when he fought with Emperor Indra, he was able to cleanly decapitate his head with a single sword. Of course, this matter could not be remembered at all by Zhang Yi at this time. Zhang Yi finished his shower and sat on the bench in the practice room with his toned upper body naked, wearing only a pair of training pants and a towel hanging from his shoulders. Ding dong! Ding dong! The smart device beside him rang as a communication came in. Zhang Yi smoothly took it over to take a look and was surprised to see a face that surprised him a bit. It was a simple and honest, yet honest and reliable face from Fremon's bearded friend, Thunder God Purin, Alexei Ivanov.